Everybody, real quickly, I wanted to go over again briefly the parts of your paper as you're getting ready to submit your methods section this coming week. Recall that our written communication is different from traditional oral communication. We don't have the body language. It's easy to be misunderstood and cited out of context, but it does allow you to communicate a high level of detail and potentially has a huge temporal and spatial scale of who can understand this and reach this at some other location or some other point in time. Oftentimes it's going to be read alone, so when you're writing, for example, your method section, you can't rely on the fact that someone has been engaged in a discussion with you and understand what you're trying to do. And realize that while you're working on individual sections right now, eventually your audience is going to be able to reorganize your paper as they see fit. In general, what's a good thesis? Again, by way of background, should be interesting. It should be rigorous and scholarly, very well researched. It should be, in the context of your method section in particular, reproducible or giving you enough information to reproduce it. Clearly, succinctly written, a fantastically crisp, logical structure. Hopefully, your overall thesis is going to give us insights into some new management issue or challenge. And a really well-written thesis will inspire you or the next person to the next step. The components of your final thesis include these things that we've been going over, but just to summarize: title, authors, who were if it was just you or your collaborators, who are the authors, the brief summary of the overall project, which is the abstract, then on into your introduction, where you're going to set up the problem, define the problem, set it up, moving into the methods section, which you're submitting this coming week. That is going to provide all the information we need to reproduce your study elsewhere or at some other point in time. The results, what you actually found, and then the discussion of the results. You may choose to simply end with a discussion, or you might have a distinct conclusions section. Going to have your acknowledgments, references, and many of you will have an appendix or a supplement to your main body of the thesis. I've put these up in the past. Nobody seems to pay attention to these. This is important guidance. Follow these recommendations. Punctuation is clearly important. Many of you struggle with appropriate everything, grammar, punctuation, etc. Everything needs to be perfect in your writing stuff. Whatever the level, whatever the assignment that you're submitting is. If you have any questions, again, show it to your roommate, show it to your friend, take it up to the writing center, etc. No errors are to be in any of the writing samples you submit. A couple quick ones. Many of you guys will get, not many of you, but I consistently see this problem every semester. People confusing affect versus effect, particularly in your methods section. Affect is an action. Effect is a noun, the result of something. Another one that absolutely will cause me to stop reading and fail you outright is if you commit the mortal sin of not being able to clearly articulate the fundamental ecological unit, which is species. Species, the word species, is both singular and plural. I can go on for hours and hours, but I won't. You guys get the point. Double check everything you're writing. Everything needs to be professional when you submit it. How will your methods section be evaluated in our peer review section this coming week? Simple. First, to make sure that everybody understands your paper, because not everybody maybe is super familiar with your project, make sure you include the title and central hypothesis of your project. You don't need to include the introduction, and in fact, don't include the introduction, but please at least give us your title and central hypothesis. What should I have in there as a double check? Well, firstly, let's make sure that the overall shape of your method section is great. That's going to include good grammar, good spelling, proper formatting according to our campus writing guide. Any figures, any maps, any diagrams should be professional and complete, following all the conventions we've been talking about in terms of figures, or the guidance for good map making that you've learned in GIS. Then the all-important content. The content should be of sufficient detail that we can understand what you did and reproduce what you did. In particular, everything from why you chose the particular sampling design that you did, what data you actually ended up collecting, what analyses you subsequently went on to perform. I understand that all of us are still working on collecting data, but this is going to be written from the perspective of you at the end of the semester. So everything's past tense, everything's active voice. You might not be exactly sure what statistical tests you'll be using, but go ahead and make your best guess and write this as if you were going to do your best guess in terms of that part that you may not quite be up to. Another thing I've noticed over the years that many of you don't include are a lot of the details that are really essential. So for example, if you use a computer program, tell me the name of that computer program. Tell me the version of that computer program. If you're using a scale, tell me the make of that scale and the model number and or the serial number of that scale. That kind of stuff. So if there was a problem, say we find out later in some statistical program or with some balance, we can go back and go, oh my gosh, these results are suspect. We got to use a different tool to process the data or collect the data maybe. Oh, you're going to also give an assessment of the overall method section, how all this stuff hangs together. I also want you to include a reference section for any references that you are including in your methods section. So this is not the reference section from your entire paper, not the reference section from your introduction, but rather the reference section solely for your methods section in this particular submission. Recall that really super detailed stuff, everything should be summarized in the methods section, but super detailed stuff, for example, the actual survey instrument if you're doing some polling, the field data sheets, the lesson plans you're giving to kids, whatever, that kind of stuff, go ahead and include that, but that level of detail should be included at the end of your thesis, most likely in an appendix. So definitely summarize for example, your survey instrument. Give us the overview. Give us a paragraph view of what you did and what the questions were like. But you don't need to give every single question unless you only had a handful of questions, for example. This is the actual form that you guys will be given, and you guys will fill these out. Notice some things are just saying yes, no, this was included, this wasn't included, and other things will actually be scored. So you can, and hopefully you guys will give each other feedback, not just orally, but also some notes jotted down as you are giving the assessment. Remember, everybody rewrites. I rewrite. Dr. Rodriguez rewrites. Dr. Steele rewrites. Everybody rewrites. But just because we're going to rewrite does not mean that you're allowed to submit an incomplete or partial method section. Everything is a complete draft that you guys are submitting to me this semester. This is just an example of one of our papers about the Deepwater Horizon. And you can see it just went through, a gazillion million iterations, eventually about 19, I think, in the context of that paper. Everybody rewrites. This is a famous picture of President Obama as he was working on a speech about the his healthcare program. And you can see that even this guy with expert helpers and expert writers, constantly revising. So it's okay if it's not perfect. I want it to be complete, but it's okay if it's not perfect. We're going to be working on this as with everything else this semester. I'm looking forward to seeing your first graph and your method section on Monday. For most of you guys, you want to bring 5 copies of your methods, printed copies of your methods section with you to class. For those of you that are in my morning section, you guys can go ahead and just bring 4 copies with you. Thanks, you guys. Have a good weekend.